Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Anne and this is Postcards from My Golden Years. I am so happy to see you today. I've got a lot to tell you. So sit back, enjoy, watch the video, and if you love it, please give me a thumbs up. And if you're not a subscriber, click below, just right below there's a little icon. If you click on it, you can subscribe for free all the time. And there's a little bell. If you click that little bell, you will get a notification every time I upload a new video. So without any further ado or delay, let's get on with the video. So today my topic is protections for seniors in France. Isn't that terrible? I hate that term, elderly. I mean, I'm 69. I don't think of myself as elderly. Do you? Anyway, if you're going to move to France, you simply have to deal with the classification, whether you like it or not, because it does offer some benefits to you. So now, when I'm speaking about benefits, this video is geared in particular to those of you who are over the age of 62, who are renting an apartment in France. So if you're not over that age and renting an apartment or renting a place to live in France, unfortunately, the protections that you are going to have are not quite this inclusive, I guess. Gotta wait till you become elderly. But it's more than just being elderly. So what we're going to discuss here is the Sécurité de Tenure, which relates to the laws that protect the elderly, as far as rental laws. Okay, in 2023, France has very strict tenant laws. And particularly for senior citizens, it's a good thing. Now, the law in general guarantees the security of tenure to people who live in a rental as their primary home in France. And if you're in the elderly class, you have additional securities that the average person would not have. For example, the law says that in France, allowed to have a minimum of 3 years in that primary home that you're renting, that apartment, regardless of what agreement or contract you may have with your landlord. So they have to guarantee you, because it's your primary home, they have to guarantee you a minimum of 3 years in that property, should you wish to stay there. Now, if you are age 65 years or older, and the landlord wishes to break that contract with you for anything other than breach of contract, the law requires that they assist in providing you rehousing or assist in getting you rehoused so that you're not left with a primary home to live in. So this is great because if they decide that they want to move into the property or put a family member in the property and they want you to leave, well, they can't just say, okay, you have to leave because I'm taking over the apartment now. They have to assist you in finding another place to live. In the past, people who were renting apartments, they felt like they had free will. They could raise the rent whenever they wanted to. And so if they had a tenant in the property who was paying, X amount of dollars rent, and now they find that, well, I think I'd like to raise the rent like a few €100. They can't just evict you and tell you, they're going to terminate the lease because, on the side here, they want to rent it to somebody. They want to raise the rent and rent it to somebody else. They can't do that, especially if it's your primary home. They have to first assist you in finding someplace else. Now, the one caveat of that guarantee that they find you someplace else is that you not only have to be over the age of 65, but your income has to be under a certain threshold. So I'm going to show you now the chart. These are the threshold dollar amounts. So in order to qualify for these additional protections as a member of the protected elderly, not only do you have to be over the age of 65, but you also have to have income that is less than these amounts. And bear in mind that, as a couple, your income may be way above those thresholds, but if something happens to you, we're talking about elderly, or I'm sorry, here in the US, we call them seniors. If something happens to your spouse down the road, once you get over 65, you start thinking about those things. So if something happens to your spouse, your income can immediately drop. For some people it can be more than half. For me, it's probably going to be half if something happens to my husband, Jeff, and it leaves me all alone. So while as a couple, we may not meet that threshold now, or I may not meet that threshold now alone, as a single person, my income may fall at or below that threshold. So take a look at this chart that I've got here. Currently, the threshold for people living in Paris is 25,165 euros. That's for people living in Paris. Now, if you live outside of Paris in the provinces, then the threshold amount is 21,165 euros. So take a look at your income and you can easily tell if you're going to qualify. Now, this also applies if the person who is over 65 has someone living with them that is under that threshold. So if a 50-year-old person was living with their mother who was 70 years old, that same qualification would apply. Also, you should bear in mind that if you are an expat and you're moving from the US anyway to France, you have to have a minimum income in order to continue to renew your long stay visa. And currently that amount is based on France's minimum wage. So currently France's minimum wage is 1,747 euros gross, and the net is about 1,383 euros a month in round numbers. I left off the coins. So you have to continually show that you have that much income to live on, at least, just to keep your long stay visa. So, I mean, there is a bit of a difference between the minimum wage and the threshold for having those additional protections as a senior over the age of 65. Now, so if you are over the age of 65 and your income, either alone or with your partner, is above that threshold, while there are rental laws that still strictly protect seniors, or as I said before, the elderly, the rehousing guarantee does not apply. In order for the landlord to be required to rehouse you in order to get you out of their apartment, you need to fall under that income. Now, often landlords don't know your age, or they don't remember your age. I mean, they may sign a lease with you and then they decide, I think I could probably get 500 euros more a month on that. And so I know you're probably not going to want to pay that, so I'm just going to get rid of you. Well, if they try to do that, there is no form you fill out that says, I'm this age, and this is my proof of age, and this is my proof of income. However, if they try to do that, you can send them a letter, and you need to send them a letter that is, the French version of certified, that says, I just wanted to bring to your attention that I am X years old, and I am under this income threshold, and therefore I am subject to your guarantee of rehousing. And then they'll have to assist you. They will have to assist you in locating other housing because they have no choice of your age, or they could simply back down and say, okay, never mind, I'm not going to do that. So if the landlord does not notify you that they want to terminate the lease, even though you may have a lease for a certain period of time, if you are considered elderly in France, you can simply ignore the limit of that lease and just continue on, and then the lease automatically renews for that same period of time. So if you started with a furnished apartment, which allows you a 1-year lease in France, and you simply choose to continue it, and you don't notify the landlord, and the landlord doesn't notify you, that lease rolls over and you continue paying. The same thing with an unfurnished apartment. Normally your lease on an unfurnished apartment is 3 years. If your landlord does not choose to break that lease, then that lease just automatically renews at the end of 3 years for another 3-year term. So keep that in mind. At the end of that 3-year minimum that you are guaranteed, the landlord can alternatively terminate the lease if they want to move into the apartment, or if they want to put a family member in that apartment. So that would be one of the reasons that they would not renew the lease. But they have to guarantee you that rental for a minimum of 3 years because you are in that protected elderly situation. So these accommodations include if the landlord themselves is over the age of 65, or their income falls below the threshold to be in that protected class of elderly. They still have to find you another place to live, and it needs to be around the same size as the place that you're renting from them, and it can't be any more than about 5 kilometers away from where you are living. And if you need special accommodations in that particular apartment, they need to find an apartment that has those qualifications or pay the cost of making them available. Now, by special accommodations, I'm assuming we're talking about if you're disabled or a handicapped person and you need, I don't know, a door that's wide enough to get into the bathroom that a wheelchair would fit into, or maybe you need a ramp. I'm not versed or knowledgeable about what all those special accommodations would be. But if you're in that category to begin with, then you already know that you need special accommodations anywhere you live, and you can't just live anywhere. So that landlord needs to provide you with an alternative accommodation to move to. And if they can't find you one that has the same space, that's under 5 kilometers, and that has the special adaptations or what have you that you require, then you can simply say that you're not leaving, and they can't do anything about it. In any case, whether you're in a protected class or not, if the landlord wants to give you notice they do not plan to renew your lease, they need to give you written notice, delivered, I guess, in a certified fashion. And the requirement is for a furnished apartment, they need to give you at least 3 months notice. And for an unfurnished apartment, they need to give you at least 6 months notice so that you have enough time to find yourself other living accommodations. Particularly if you're in an unfurnished place, that means you have to pack all your stuff, you have to find a mover, you have to find another unfurnished apartment. So that's why they give you twice as long as far as notice goes. In general, French rental laws in France are very much pro-tenant. This is pretty much at any age, they're very pro-tenant. And this is why landlords are extremely particular about who they're going to rent to, because they don't want to put themselves in a situation where they have an unfavorable tenant that they can't get rid of. So this is why when you are getting ready to look for an apartment rental and make application for that rental, you need to put together a real kick-ass dossier that makes you look fantastic, and make sure, in fact, that this is legit, that you're going to have enough income to cover the cost of that rental for the entire lease period. Once that landlord hands the keys over to you, pretty much that place is yours to live in. They are not allowed to enter that apartment without your permission, and you can press charges against them if they harass you or enter the apartment without your permission. Now, if the landlord wants the right to enter the apartment once a year for an annual take a look, it has to be written into the lease. If it isn't written into the lease, then they don't have that right. So make sure that if this is discussed verbally when you're communicating or negotiating with the landlord, that if they want the ability to come to the apartment with an appointment, made with you in advance, they want that ability, that it is written into the lease that they will have the right to come and take a look at the apartment once a year. So as a tenant, basically you have 4 requirements. You need to pay the rent on time. You need to follow the rules of the house if there are certain rules in the building or that the landlord has laid out and put in writing in the lease. You need to follow those rules. You need to take care of maintenance of the apartment and take care of the repair of any internal things that need repair while you're living there. And in addition, if you break something in the apartment, it's your responsibility to take care of paying for the repair or replacement of that. Because ultimately, at the end of the lease, you're going to need to return that apartment to the exact condition that it was provided to you. Now, in addition to the lease that you're signing, when the keys are given to you, you should be provided with an inventory. And this should be an inventory of everything that's in the apartment, particularly if it's furnished. Every little item that's in the apartment and the condition of those items. And you should take that inventory and go through the apartment and confirm that the inventory is accurate. Because the security deposit that you're required to pay, the return in full of that security deposit is going to be based on an inventory of what you leave there when you depart for another home. So your inventory at the beginning needs to match the inventory at the end. Now, sometimes people get keys to an apartment, but they don't move in for a while. When you move in, you should go around and take an inventory if it hasn't been provided to you. Take an inventory immediately of everything in the apartment, the condition, just all of the details. If you're doing this through an agency, a real estate agent, I believe that the realtors in France have a form that all of this information can be provided on. And if you've got anything missing from that inventory when you move in, something that you're not finding, you need to notify the landlord immediately that this was on the inventory, it's not there. Or if the condition is different than what the inventory says, you need to notify the landlord so that you don't get charged for it. If there's a washing machine and a dryer and a dishwasher, whatever, turn on all of the appliances. Make sure all of the appliances work. Because if they don't work and you don't, let's say you're not a cooker, and you don't find out the stove doesn't work for a few months until that night you decide to invite some company and try to turn on the oven and it doesn't go on, that's going to be blamed on you because the landlord doesn't care whether you didn't turn the stove on for 3 months. So you need to check the condition of everything in the apartment. Make sure everything works. Make sure you have everything on the inventory. Now, as with a lot of legal documents in France, the primary language there is French. So this inventory needs to be completed in French and presented in French. Now, considering that there are a lot of expats that move over to France, they don't speak French, they can write it in English, but before it is presented to the landlord, it needs to be translated into French. So keep that in mind. You have some rights if the owner of that apartment decides that they would like to sell the apartment. First of all, if they decide that they'd like to sell it, you have first right of refusal. They have to offer it to you. They can establish the price that they're asking for it. and you have 30 days to respond to that offer of sale of the apartment. If at the end of the 30 days you have decided that you're going to take it, you have 30 days to close on the sale. Unless you're getting a mortgage, then you would have 60 days. However, with the mortgage, I have not yet seen any mortgage writers advertising that they will write mortgages for people that are over the age of 60. I've heard of a few people who have told me that, yeah, they got a mortgage and they're in their 60s. However, based on research that I've done and a webinar on moving to France from the US and buying or renting, I have been led to believe by people writing mortgages that they just don't write mortgages for people that are that old. So for the most part, if you're in that protected class, you're going to be buying that house or apartment for cash. So just keep that in mind. So that would mean that you have a total of 60 days, 30 days to give a response, 30 days to finalize the bill of sale of the contract and get the keys to your brand new apartment. Now, if you turn down the price or you make an offer and they don't accept your offer, then you can stay in that apartment. And if the landlord goes on and they list it somewhere and somebody else offers them a lower price and they accept that lower price from somebody else, legally, they once again have to give you first right of refusal. So then they have to come back to you again before they deal with the person who made a lower offer that they were going to accept. They have to come back to you again and say, okay, a lower offer was made on this apartment for X amount of dollars. I have agreed that I want to sell it for that. I'm giving you first right of refusal. So once again, you have 30 days to make a decision, 60 days to finalize the purchase. Now, as far as giving notice at the end of the lease, the tenant needs to give 1 month's notice that they're not going to renew the lease. The landlord has to give 3 months notice. So as a tenant, you can get out of the lease on a lot less notice than a landlord can. If it is an unfurnished apartment, the landlord must give you 6 months notice. You need to give the landlord 3 months notice. Now, when you rent an apartment in France, you are required by French law to buy a liability policy to protect you against fire, water damage, explosion, or any other major problem. And if you don't buy that policy, because you're required by law to have it, the landlord can buy it on your behalf and then charge you for it. So I kind of think it's better to do your own shopping to get the best policy rather than let the landlord just go buy anything to make sure they have it and then charge you what could be more than maybe you could find a policy for. So keep that in mind, add that to the budget that you're preparing on what it's going to cost to rent an apartment in France. In addition to that liability insurance, the landlord is also required to have landlord insurance on the property as well. So you don't get charged for that. That's their own responsibility, but that's another insurance policy that is required by French law. So because several of the cities, or a number of the cities in France, the larger cities, have kind of become overcrowded and there are shortages of apartments, it used to be that landlords could automatically evict people and raise the rent sky high whenever they felt like doing it with no repercussions. Well, in a number of cities in France now, there are limits on how much the rent can be raised. France has a limit on how much the rent can be raised annually. Currently, in 2023, that limit in mainland France is 3.5%. That is the maximum they can increase the rent when they renew the lease. If you live in Corsica, which is also part of France, I believe the percent is 2%. They can't increase the rent more than 2% on Corsica. So no landlords should anymore be telling you they're going to change your rent and now it's going to increase more than the allowed maximum. That's it. So it's great that France does have the rent control, because in some areas the rents are already very high. Take a look at Paris. I mean, you got to pay a lot of money for a little shoebox. So, and then to have that rent increase, 5 or 10%, there are probably some unscrupulous landlords who would do that if not for the rent control that exists in France. So it's good to know as seniors, if we don't have a high income, that we will be protected as far as the security of having a roof over our heads, particularly if it's our primary place to live. Fortunately, I don't think I'm ever going to be in that situation, because my income is already or will already be over that threshold unless they raise the threshold. But there are other people, not particularly as fortunate, who may not have the same income. I'm going to be living on my Social Security with my husband. Based on how long we worked and what we earned, we're able to collect a higher amount of Social Security. Plus, I waited until just now, as I'm about to turn 70, to collect my Social Security. I was on a widow's survivor benefit from a past husband from age 60, and I just recently converted that to my actual real Social Security, and I couldn't be more thrilled at the amount of money that I'll get compared to what I was getting with my widow's amount. So that puts me in a good place. I don't have that same guarantee of a replacement home if they want to terminate a lease on me if I happen to be alone. But I feel very comfortable as far as meeting the financial threshold and the ability to take care of myself and keep a roof over my head. So it's good to know, though, if you're a senior at or below that threshold figure, that they don't make it very easy for a landlord to get rid of you. How else to say it? So I wanted to, before I finish this video, I wanted to give a special shout out to one of my YouTube co-creators over in Fontainebleau, France. This is a lady in our same age range who found a way to make her dream of living in France come true. She lives just outside of Paris. She did it all by herself. This lady is in her 70s, and if you are looking for, or if you have questions about what it's like being a senior now, already living alone in France, I want you to check out this lady's YouTube channel. Her name is Janice. Her YouTube channel is called Janice In France, and I sort of made a deal that, I'd send some of my viewers over to check out her channel, and, she promised to send over some of her viewers to check out us, because we're going over to France as a couple. She came over as a senior, and she is already living the dream. So check out Janice In France, and you may want to subscribe to her channel as well. Help her grow, help me grow. I hope I've given you a little bit more information if you're a senior that's looking to go to France and rent, and maybe you fall into that protected class. And if you don't, the rental laws are fairly strict. in favor of the tenant in France. So unless you break the contract or in breach of your rental contract, there's pretty much not a whole lot that they can do to get rid of you. And why would they want to? Because you're going to be the perfect tenant, right? The good news is that if you love where you live and you want to keep staying there, you can just stay there beyond the end of your lease. If your landlord has not given you notice, you just keep on staying there, and your lease automatically rolls over into a brand new lease for that same rental period. So that's good. So you don't have to worry about it. I mean, that's one of the reasons I want to do an unfurnished apartment, because I hate moving. I have moved 7 times since 2010. That's horrible. I want to just go someplace, make it my own, and live and be and enjoy, our home. And not have to worry that every year we're going to have to sweat out, is the landlord going to renew the lease? So, this may be important to you as well. There are some good things about growing old and becoming a senior. We call them seniors here in the U.S. We're going to have to get used to that term, elderly. In my last video, I talked about putting together a really good dossier. You're not going to want to miss that. So if you haven't seen the last video, go back after this one and take a look at that one. If you enjoy my videos, please give me a thumbs up. It really does help my channel grow. It tells YouTube, hey, this was an interesting video. Show it to other people. And the algorithms love those thumbs up because they start showing the video and more people get to see it. If you enjoyed this video, you may want to check these additional videos on our move to France out as well.